Workers all over the world are abused, overworked, underpaid, and have several of their human rights violated by their employers. These poor working conditions happen because it is cheaper and more profitable than giving them their full rights. These poor conditions include lack of payment, dangerous environment, long hours without break, cramped space, bad lighting, and abuse of all kinds in the workplace. Despite our progress as a society, these problems are still very relevant in our world today. Sweatshops. A factory or workshop, especially in the clothing industry, where manual workers are employed at very low wages for long hours and under poor conditions. The workers here are exploited, underpaid, and overworked in oftentimes dangerous, hostile, and cramped conditions. Companies that use sweatshops will put them in developing nations in order to avoid the scrutiny of the public. Most of the sweatshops exist in Central America and Asia due to their loosely enforced labor laws. Workers typically make between 25 cents to $2 an hour, working 100 hours a week. With this setup, it is much harder for consumers to be aware of their practices. Nike, a company that has its name all over sports, also has its name all over sweatshops. Since the 70s, they have been accused time and time again about their sweatshops to produce their footwear. The documentary Behind the Swoosh by Jim Cady shows his personal experiences with living as a sweatshop worker for $1.25 a day. These people were forced to live in slums next to open sewers, unable to even afford 3 meals a day. The sweatshop workers are denied their basic human rights for the sole purpose of profit. Child labor. According to UNICEF, there are over 150 million children employed as child laborers. These children are driven to work, often because of financial instability caused by a plethora of situations. This happens almost exclusively in third world countries, where there's no welfare, healthcare, or any other type of government support. Most of these children are employed in sweatshops as they can be paid even less than regular workers. This can oftentimes lead to slavery and other exploitation, as it doesn't allow them basic human rights such as education and healthcare. These children may also be trafficked and exposed to violent situations, with boys put in armed forces and girls used for sexual exploitation. Slavery. Closely tied with child labor and human trafficking, slavery is when someone is forced to do something against their will, being treated as property rather than a person with rights. Despite what you might think, slavery now is worse than any historic period of time, at over 40 million enslaved people. Compare this to an estimated 13 million slaves transacted between the 15th and 19th century. Almost every single country has slaves in it, including first world countries like the US and Canada. However, the vast majority of slaves exist in Asia and Africa, in developing nations. India, the second most populated country in the world, has an estimated 18 million people in slavery, most in the brick kiln industry. Despite our global efforts, many of which seem to be in vain, as slavery is not only high, but also increasing. We all know that 40 million is a lot, but it is such a large number that no one can truly understand how big that is. Look at this. Imagine every single one of these dots is a slave. This is just 1 million dots. Now watch this 40 more times. These figures are unlikely to go down, but rather increase in the coming years. Why? Why does this still happen? Why is no one doing anything about this? These are all valid questions you might be asking right now. The answer, although unfortunate, is very simple: greed. The people in charge want one thing and one thing only: money. They will get this by any means necessary, including violating human rights. Figures suggest that slavery earns $150 billion a year, and this is only going to increase. This happens in developing countries as they have looser laws and higher corruption, making it easier to get away with it. Although there are many organizations that attempt to end slavery, without any proper government action, there will never be any systemic change. How can you make a difference? The answer is stay informed. Be aware of who sources ethical labor and who doesn't. Understand which companies employ the use of sweatshops, and which companies employ well-paid workers. With this knowledge, you can be a much smarter consumer, only supporting companies who use ethical labor rather than cheap labor. Make sure to also pressure your government officials to do something about this issue. Write a letter, talk to your neighbors, and most importantly, vote. We have many privileges living in a first world country, learning about these atrocities rather than experiencing them firsthand. You have a voice, something we all take for granted. Go outside, exercise your freedom of speech, and help those who cannot speak.